I'm Anna, your host, and I'm really excited this week to welcome Lisa Palasti to our interview series. Lisa is coming all the way from Ontario, Canada to chat with us, and Lisa is an RDI consultant amongst many of her other talents. And I have a friend working personally with her who sends the most amazing recommendations about her. So I'm really excited to get Lisa on to share her knowledge with us. So, Lisa, would you like to start off by, for those watching who don't know about RDI, give us a little bit of a background of what RDI is, how it was founded, and what it looks like?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. And a little background around RDI. It's a kind of an interesting question because people often say, can you give us a little rundown on RDI? And the challenge then is trying to create something that's concise and clear and short because it is a wonderfully comprehensive program. So I'll try to give you the elevator speech of what RDI is. First, let's say what the RDI stands for. So Relationship Development Intervention. And it's a program that was founded by Dr. Gutstein and Dr. Sheely it was copyrighted, I believe, back in 2000. I first learned about it in 2002 after he had published a couple of his first books on the topic of RDI. And it is a developmental model that focuses on empowering and educating the parents because we believe that parents are the ones that can make the biggest difference in their children's lives. It's a developmental-based program, so we're not looking at trying to extinguish behaviors that look like autism or reinforce behaviors that look like typical development in the hopes that we can create a child who looks like a typically developing child based on their behavior. Rather, we understand that behavior is a symptom of often a lagging step in development or as a communication. And so we look at where the child hit a wall in their development by doing a thorough assessment between parent and child and looking at the guiding relationship. And once we're able to do that initial baseline, then the consultant will come in and they'll do some hypothesizing, some testing to further determine where the child's developmental readiness is. And then we will help the parents learn how to begin, how to structure their environment, optimize or evaluate, their child's optimal learning environment, learning how to structure and set up activities with their child, and how to integrate the goals that we give to the parents, how to integrate those into their everyday meaningful experiences. And because RDI is also very much a part of being involved in engaged experiential learning with a more expert guide, which is usually the parents, but we often bring in grandparents and potentially some other caregivers or what we call RDI extenders.
Beautiful. So I guess in the world of behavioral interventions, if we look at them as a whole, you sort of have at one end of the spectrum the ABA type interventions where it's very therapist led, and it's kind of a lot of requesting what the therapist wants from the child. And then I look at RDI and floor time, it's kind of being way up the other end where it's extremely respectful of the child and their needs and where they're at, and understanding that what they're doing, like you said, their behavior is a symptom of where they're at developmentally, and it's a symptom of where they're at in their body, and it's communication. So I think what I really love about these types of therapies is that it allows the parent to have such a better understanding of your child, because your focus is not on stopping this and instigating that. It's on understanding, connecting, and using that to drive your child's development.
That's very well said. That's exactly what it is. And it's a process that is really recognized in how children typically develop. So rather than putting some kind of strange um, program in place that really limits what the potential can be for children, we're focused on building the mind. So Dr. Gutstein, the founder of RDI, says that parents become mind-minded. And remember earlier I was telling you that I love some of the simplest things he says, but that's true. They become very mindful about helping to develop the mental processes and the mental habits and tools that children are going to require in order to experience a long-term quality of life. And that is the thing that really spoke to me about RDI way back in 2003. So I'd heard about Dr. Gutstein in 2002. In 2003, I had the good luck to be able to see him in a workshop in Toronto. And I remember when he started to talk about the long-term quality of life research that had been done and the outcomes. And he was speaking at that point specifically around those that have been diagnosed with high functioning autism or Asperger's, because often there's a misconception too that says if you have, you'll be fine if you're HFA, if you're high functioning autism, and that there's kids that need it much more. Well, it doesn't tell us how much or how hard these individuals are having to work in order to try to function in the real world. But regardless, whether a child is low functioning or high functioning, what really drew me to Dr. Gutstein was the fact that he was talking about these long-term outcome studies. And I was able to connect the dots, and I thought, if he's talking about it, that means he's put into place a program that's going to address it. Because prior to that, I didn't mention, but I'm also the parent of two children who are now young adults. They're soon to be 21 and 24, but they have benefited greatly from RDI. So back when they were just 4 and 7, I was still losing sleep at night, worrying about the long-term outcomes of the way that we were investing our time, all of our time and our energy and our money then, which was through ABA. And my son had learned a lot of the things that other children knew, his colors and letters and numbers, and he knew to raise his hand while he was sitting in circle, but he never did. And, we learned how to, we tried to extinguish, some behaviors that looked like autism, but that ended up becoming like whack-a-mole because, just when you get rid of one, another one pops up. So we, in RDI, we don't worry about that, which is actually really refreshing. And it's a very much a proactive approach because we know that development takes time. We know that we're building the neural integration in the brain, that we're giving children with, or individuals with autism, lots and lots of meaningful, authentic experiences.
Exactly. It's that authenticity and the meaningfulness behind it. And someone said to me on the weekend, that social emotional connection is the utmost importance, because even in typically developing children, that's what drives their development. And children on the spectrum are no different. It's just that they have more of a challenge in that area. So when you're using a therapy that addresses that social emotional connection, that's going to be the most highly motivating for that child to really drive their progress.
Most definitely, because if children don't feel safe, they are not going to be in a mental, they're not going to have the mental availability to learn. And so they feel the safest typically with their parents. Children with autism, it just makes the most sense that the person that is going to be the most connected to the child emotionally, physiologically, biologically, they have the greatest capacity to really co-regulate with a child, which means to attune to the child and to start to enter into that kind of back and forth reciprocity of engagement. Parents have the ability to help a child develop greater self-regulation, which I was just reading something, I don't know, in the last 24 hours, it said self-regulation is the #1 attribute needed for individuals to be successful in life. Now, mind you, there's lots of them, but it's through the parent and child relationship that develops.
Yeah, and the trust that it builds, like that's something that's really been shown to me over the last few days. The trust that your child, you know, knows, like, Mum, she's got me, you know, she gets me, she's got my back, she's here for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I had a client one time tell me, they said they'd only been working with me for a few months, but they said, my child loves you. And they were just a little shocked by it. And I actually said, yeah, they don't love me. They don't even know me. But what they do know, you know, not, they don't know me well, but what they do know is how good they feel when they're with me, because of the opportunity for me to create co-regulation, create experiences that allow them to experience a sense of themselves, to experience their own autonomy, their own agency, and that feels good. And so when kids can start to build more and more of those, they do begin to seek out more opportunities for engagement with their parents. It starts with their parents, but it will translate into it will generalize into in their motivations with their teachers and other people, as long as those environments are conducive to supporting the child's emotional and social development, as long as they feel safe.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so what are the philosophies and the guiding principles behind how RDI was developed?
Well, RDI is kind of been, how do I say this? So how was it developed and where is it today? I often say it's very cutting edge. Dr. Gutstein has done an exhaustive study of the research over the last 2 decades, and then he's considered what was good research, because research in a lab that's quite contrived sometimes, and depending on how it's put together, may not really demonstrate good research. But once he's determined what research is solid and it is consensual, meaning that there's other people that are also doing the similar bodies of research, he will take that information and then put to practice goals. He's evolved our program to include some of those aspects into the programming. So this means that there's a deviation from just trying to address those deficits that are listed in the DSM-V, for example, because a lot of the characteristics that are described as being part of autism, it's not a comprehensive list, and it's we've discovered a lot more about neuroscience and autism and typical development in just the last 5 years, or especially even in the last, in the last 10 years, but especially in the last 5. And so that's one of the things that I think that really sets RDI apart, is taking the research and then putting that to clinical practice. So, and then focusing on the parents first and foremost is another thing that sets aside RDI, is that we have a huge focus on developing the guiding relationship and helping parents to recognize how they can help their children become who they're meant to be by carefully guided, scaffolded moments. And that scaffolding can mean that we can give the child some more supports, or we can start to take them away as the child develops greater understanding, because we're continually working at what we would call a one step ahead approach, so that it's really manageable. And that's where you said before, Anna, you said that the child feels like you really get me. And it's that combination of being able to, for parents, they know exactly where they left off and they know exactly where to pick up again, like nobody else does. And so they are able to create these guiding moments, learn to evaluate them afterwards. What was working, what didn't work, what questions might I have, how do I want to approach this the next time? And every time they do that, they start to develop greater competency as a guide. And we know that we need to have a competent guide before we can have, we refer to the individuals, the children or the young adults or teens as apprentices. So they don't start off as apprentices because they don't know what's at stake. Rather, most of the time, individuals with autism are often saying, no thanks, because when you're being guided, you're being put into a situation of uncertainty, and that's scary for individuals with autism. I like to try to avoid that. So, so with that safe, scaffolded learning opportunities, the parents develop into mentally agile guides, and the children develop into motivated apprentices.
Oh, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's if you know any of my work, or the viewers will know that I'm a huge proponent of, as mothers, actually working on ourselves first so that we can then help our children. And that's across the board. That's in terms of mental health or self-care, or just getting enough sleep, or eating, food that's going to fuel your body. And you probably find in your experience that, you're coming here to help a child, you're coming into this person's home to help their child, but probably a lot of your focus actually goes into helping the parents in terms of their state of mind and their mindset and how they're just managing life themselves.
It's huge. It has to be our number one focus, actually. And in our goals that we have listed, we have them broken down into 4 major goals. And goal 1, 2, and 3 are really all about parent education, parent empowerment, helping parents to make sure that they're taking time for themselves, taking time for their marriage, taking time for their children with ASD. Because we know that you can't be therapeutic every moment of the day, and that being in crisis is actually some of the behaviors that would coincide with a parent who's still in that crisis stage. I mean, crisis is kind of a scary word, but
realistic at times.
Yeah. And so it could be, having been a parent, I'm still a parent, but having been a parent of newly diagnosed children, I can tell you that I spent a lot of late nights on the internet, sometimes till 3 or 4 in the morning. And then in hindsight, it didn't serve me well at all. I think today, though, it's even more problematic because there's, that was 16, 17, 18 years ago. And so today there's millions. I don't even know what the number would be, but the amount of information, it's crazy. It's a huge overload.
Yeah.
So yes, we focus on that a great deal in terms of, we can't expect a child to be regulated or to self-regulate if the parent's not self-regulated.
Yeah.
And so what does it take for the parent to get there? It's really important.
And I feel like that's a real missing link that we have at the moment, especially in the early days of diagnosis. It's generally the focus all goes onto the child. Okay, we've got this diagnosis. What does the child need? Let's get A, B, C, D all happening. But there's not that focus, oh mum, make sure you're looking after yourself. There's kind of a flip, comment will be thrown in there that has no real foundational basis to it, or really the importance is not placed on it. And that's what I love about these therapies that bring the parents into it, because it can be an amazing learning opportunity for us as mothers if we can embrace it all. And we will learn as much about ourselves in doing these therapies with our child as we will learn, we will help ourselves as much as we will help our children. When you're in a situation where you go to ABA or a therapist-led intervention, you send your child off and then they come back and you go home, it's like there's 2 separate worlds there and they never intertwine.
And it's unfortunate, but sometimes I hear from families that have reached out to me with the comment that in their current programming or therapy model, whatever that may be, that they're not being included. And these parents desperately want to know what to do. I don't think that they want to be over reliant on other professionals to help them raise their kids. I think although it's a scary notion, I think for some parents, when they want to step into a developmental model that's parent focused, I think sometimes it doesn't mean they have to jump in with all their, eggs in one basket right from the start. I really like to take the approach that I'm going to educate and empower the parents. So let's say if they're doing ABA as well, when they come to me to do RDI, I don't say to them, I can't do this with you while you're still doing that. But what I want to help you do is to make a really well-informed decision that you've made, that you can trust in because you've become that educated. And so for some families, it depends. And one particular mom, she decided to stop doing the ABA that they were doing within a matter, I think, of 2 weeks. And another mom that I worked with, it took her 6 months. But it was just their comfort zone, I guess, with making those decisions. Still, along the way, we try to support a team approach so that if families are working with other therapists, I definitely want them to make sure they have opportunities to observe. I'd like to observe. And that's true of the school situation too, or the preschool situation. I like to have the opportunity to go in and observe in those environments so that I can help to inform the parent. I suggest that they observe and then they can make those good decisions.
Yeah, it's funny. I mentioned to you we had an outreach on the weekend with a developmental play therapist, and I invited my son's speech therapist and occupational therapist to come along and watch. So they both were able to come for about an hour and a half, and so they just sat there and observed. And when they left, they both said to him, "I have never seen Jackson so engaged with another person. I have never seen him so calm and still. I have never seen him have that amount of interactive attention span." They were just shocked at what sort of trust and rapport and relationship he built up within half a day with my son.
Wow.
So bringing in, having all of your team, even though they're in different fields or different specialities, it doesn't have to be black and white or one or the other. Everyone's learning from everyone.
Yes. So we can try to build that. That's very important for sure.
So would you like to tell us what would be some of the goals or activities or games that you may build into a program for a child doing RDI?
Sure. So we talked already about the parent focus. And so often when the parent is beginning to try to learn how to modify their communication styles or their even their pacing to help the child with processing or as an invitation. So that's all in play early on. But what we find is that those goals are also benefiting the child at the same time. So it's it's a parallel process, I guess, as we're helping to build the parent's competency. The child's competency is also really starting to blossom. And so the type of activities that we could do, ideally what we would have families do is they would receive a goal from us as consultants based on our assessment of where the family's at or what is most important, where they need to be getting, what are the priorities. And then we would educate them about the goal, because it's really important, I think, that families know why they're doing something versus just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Yeah. Well, you're going to have more investment if you know what the implications are for developing that in your child to fill in that developmental step, or why this is so important. So sometimes, for example, slowing down can feel counterproductive to families when they just want to, they're in crisis and they just want to speed up and get their child to do something and fix this behavior and get rid of that, because it all triggers me and makes me feel, as a parent. So that's why we focus on parent self-regulation as well. But so some of the the goals, we'll give a parent a goal. They'll learn how to frame it. And this is thinking about how they're going to set up their environment, how they're going to plan the activity, how long it's going to take, what the child's role will be, what communication emphasis they'll use, what type of potential scaffolding they might use, what could potentially be a distraction, what are the child's action limitations, is fine motor skill a challenge for them, just thinking about who they are, who's the child's strengths and challenges as we plan the engagements. Those planned activities typically get videotaped, and then we teach parents to learn how to begin to evaluate their work. And so it's like you're online in the moment, and then afterwards you go offline to kind of consider and evaluate how things went. And through that process, you're learning in a way that things get missed when you're in the midst of moments, right? So as you take time to consider and learn, the families, they'll go through that process of evaluation under the careful guidance of a consultant so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. And eventually what happens is the guide develops into a really mentally agile guide. And it's because they've taken that time to reflect, and then they're able to access that learning more quickly when they're in the moment. It's in the moment learning that's kind of challenging. So an activity, we could look at play. Play can definitely be an activity, but we can also look at real world, everyday routine types of things like baking or walking to the park. And depending on what the goal is, we can integrate that into the everyday experiences. And so initial goal could be co-regulation, which is really helping the child and the parent to feel what it feels like to be in sync, to develop that synchronicity with each other so that they recognize when they don't have it. Because we want the child to start to feel what it feels like. That's going to build their motivation. And then when they don't have it, they're going to recognize that too, and they're going to start to be able to make repairs. So parents are also carefully guided as to when they can start to slow down more for their child to potentially make a repair. Because sometimes when children first begin with us, they're not capable of that. If they lose their attention or get distracted by something else, they will still need the parent to help redirect them and bring them back. It can just be a quick little spotlight on what they're doing, but it also may mean that you have to kind of control the spatial boundaries a little bit more carefully with a child. Some of the goals that we often will work on could be nonverbal communication, which helps to promote greater emotional attunement. It's a foundation for effective communication. As a communicator, we need to continually monitor our partners so that as we send information, we need to check in and see, did you comprehend what I just said? Do you agree with what I said? Okay, let's play, whatever it is. But so that's a classic one that has so many elements to it, the nonverbal perspective taking. It's critical for understanding how do my actions impact your actions and what can I do about it. So it builds interpersonal agency or interpersonal competence. Social referencing it fits in there really well with nonverbal communication too, because children will often shift their gaze to their parent to receive feedback when they're faced with uncertainty. Our kids with autism don't know that they can do that. And so if we can help them to learn that they can understand their world better by using their gazing in a very meaningful way, then it seems to really help to further establish the guiding relationship and open up their worlds. So it's funny, I'll have a family that will ask me, how can I help my child to be more interested in other people's perspectives? Or how can I help my child to pay better attention? And at the root of that is really nonverbal communication, because helping them start to understand that they can infer meaning by using their eyes in a way that helps them understand the world can be pretty empowering for a child.
Yeah. And I think with that social referencing, it just brings the other people into their world so much more, because all of a sudden it's like, it's not just me enjoying this thing. It's like, hey, like they're enjoying it and they're enjoying it. Or, you know, it's not just me who's worried about this thing or frightened by this thing. Or, you know, when you are frightened by this thing, it's like, hey, I can figure out what's going on by looking at this person. It opens up their awareness of everybody else in the room with them.
Yeah, it's huge. So I was working with this one boy who would have such challenges with unexpected things that would happen at school, such as outdoor recess is canceled. They're having indoor recess. Or at one point I went in to observe the student, and I thought it was an interesting exercise, but they all had a dead fish that they got to take a piece of paper to put on top of the fish and then draw with a crayon, and it would kind of outline anyway, I thought it was quite interesting, but it was also very smelly. So the boy that I was there to observe, he had a real sensory, an auditory aversion to things that smell bad, as did I. But anyway, it was interesting because of that experience, and having talked with his support team at school, I said, what we should try to do is try to point out, he had a couple of people a couple peers that he was more connected to that were really kind kids that he liked to hang out with. So we said, let's start pointing out that, you know, Robbie's not crazy about indoor recess either. He looks pretty disappointed. And oh, Sarah's wrinkling up her nose at that fish. She thinks it's stinky too. So anyway, just even opening up his world in that way by pointing out, and this was some of the work we'd already been doing at home, but now let's elaborate this in a way that it didn't naturally translate for this child to that extent to think to do that for himself as part of his own self-regulation. But what happened was he started to not feel alone. He started to see like, oh, other people can feel the way that I feel too. And so in that way, it didn't have to be so unsettling for him.
Yeah, absolutely. That's gorgeous. So I guess what I'm hearing is that if you're running a program at home, it's not necessarily going to be, you know, you sit down for 2 hours and you do these really structured activities. It's more figuring out goals that are part of your lifestyle, figuring out how to motivate your child through doing things that you're doing in everyday life, and using that to help your child stretch themselves a little bit.
So they're through those everyday real world experiences that we really want to try to build on. And that can be play or it can be chores. But I think that when I reflect back on my childhood, I really wanted to do the things that my mom or my grandma or my great grandmother, you know, were doing. I remember having those memories. This is of what we call episodic memories of our prior experience. We encourage parents to think about considering what they learned as youngsters or even young adults. I also had a wonderful boss when I was in my early 20s that I think really mentored me in a beautiful way. But we do invite parents to think about those experiences, because it helps them to understand it's a part of who they are and who they've become. And of course, we want them to have that same relationship with their child. So we really want to anchor that in. So when we invite parents to think about how and where they're going to do RDI, we ask them, what are the things that you're already doing? What are the things that your child is already doing? Because you can join them too. And it doesn't mean, you know, in RDI, I think we call it the guiding relationship, but sometimes it is following the child's lead until you can build that connection. And then you can make those little modifications just to stretch them that much more. And so what are you already doing? What's the child already doing? What would you like to do? So with a distance client of mine, I mentioned earlier about the great distance in the very remote area that one of my clients lived in. But after we worked together for a while and everything was going really well, we started to explore different ways that they would expand the way that they spent time together. It turns out mom used to play piano. And so, and we didn't think that the boy would be able to participate in piano lessons that were terribly long. So I suggested actually, why don't they split a lesson? And that way it's beneficial for the piano teacher as well, because she probably wouldn't want to have a student that would just come and maybe only spend 15 minutes, at a time. But I think it did end up being half an hour and half an hour. Anyway, can you imagine how wonderful I felt when the parents sent me the videos of she and her son each doing their own recital.
Aww.
And at the end of the boy's piece, her son's piece, he actually did this wonderful little bow like this, and mom said, I didn't even tell him to do that, but he was just in his full glory of being able to do that. So yeah, so it doesn't have to be any one specific activity. In fact, when Dr. Gutstein was asked a lot years ago, when he used to do a lot of he used to travel quite a bit, used to do a lot of 2-day workshops all across the world. And people would say, can just tell us an RDI activity. And he said, anything you can do when you're not dead. But it can be. He got a little bit concerned because it's actually a couple of his first books, solving the relationship puzzle for young children, and then there was one solving the relationship puzzle for older teens and adults. There was 2 books, but they were primarily all about activities. And the downside of that was, in hindsight, was that people thought that to do RDI just meant that you did these activities without the really strong understanding that the goal is, again, another simple saying, when we're doing RDI activities, we're always thinking about the goal underneath the goal. So if the goal was to make a Christmas craft of some kind, this is like the obvious apparent goal, but what's the underlying goal? Like, what are you working on? Are you working on co-regulation, coordinating actions, perspective taking, problem solving, nonverbal, what is it? So, yeah, so and that's how we help parents. Mm-hmm.
That can be a real challenge for if you're a reformed perfectionist, A-type control freak mother like me. We in the beginning days where we were just going to our stock standard speech therapist, and I would say, okay, so how many hours a week should I be doing these activities with my child?
Yes.
Like literally at that stage, I was like, okay, so I'm on Tuesdays, from 10 till 2, we're going to sit down and do these, and then so to move into this whole other world of where it's a gray area and it's not necessarily completely structured, and it's not you do this and you do A, B, C, and then you get the outcome of Z,
Yes.
Being in this world of, not having, and like you said, not having that focus on the outcome, but just having the focus of what am I trying to do here? Yes, I'm trying to teach my child to make a Christmas craft, but really what I'm trying to do is just connect with them and understand them and show them that I love them. So yeah, it's a whole nother world from being in that do A, B, C and get D sort of kind of thing to, it's this. And even, like what sort of, I could say to you, what sort of time commitment is involved in this? Well, it's your life. It's little bits peppered throughout the day. It's how how he gets off the school bus. It's a way of living as opposed to 2 hours that you do on a Tuesday morning.
That's really well said. And I would have to say that it's one of the bigger challenges in RDI is that for families to carve out time to do this. So, but it's really more about quality than quantity. Once they can set aside the time to frame and plan their activities so that they can give them to their consultant to get the next steps, because it's got to be this process of continual learning, and it's hard to know where the parents are at unless there is a collaboration with the consultant. And so, but that process really helps them to be mindful so that they can start to feel like, okay, now I can take this beyond just doing social referencing laundry. Now I can do social referencing scavenger hunts or hide and seek. I can do social referencing at the grocery store or, you know, at the mall. It's I think for parents, it can become something that they get really hooked on as well when they start to experience their own momentum, their own motivation, their own competency. It does help to propel them forward. But yeah, the amount of time is kind of it's just a subjective, you know, how much is enough? Like, how much do you want to parent?
Yeah, and
you know, you want it. Yeah,
it's that it's addressing that control that we can have in ourselves, or that, you know, a lot of mums have struggled with guilt around, I'm not doing enough. Have I done enough today? Have I spent enough time with my child? Have I given them enough attention? So it's actually a way that we can learn to address in ourselves, we are enough, we are doing enough, starting to learn for ourselves, you know, to drop that feeling of I'm not doing enough, I'm not taking them to enough therapies, I'm not spending enough time with them. All of that stuff is all working on ourselves.
yes, and also recognizing that less is more, so that when our children are really overwhelmed and overscheduled, then they don't have the mental resources available to remediate the autism.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And the scheduling can be an important piece too, because as you and I talked about, Anna, earlier, about the importance of the parent taking care of themselves, that scheduling could actually say, okay, you know, considering how you're going to divide your time, so that part of that is also taking time for you to refuel and to regroup and to feel available for your kids. Yeah.
Now, you're in Canada, I'm in Australia. We were chatting earlier about how technology opens up everything for us. So you mentioned you have some distance clients that you work with, and really with Skype and Zoom, it's quite easy to work with anyone all over the world. You know, you can film behaviors and film when you're playing with your child and share it with anybody that you need to. So for parents who are interested in finding out more about RDI, do you want to let us know if you can recommend some consultants nearby within Australia, or how we can find some consultants? And also, if somebody's wanting to work with you, how would that look?
Sure. So I think that it would probably be best to speak to an RDI consultant in Australia to fully understand how the funding works there. But as I understand, RDI is funded in Australia. And if you go to the RDI Connect, this is the headquarters, this is their website, rdiconnect.com, then you can find a consultant there. So there'll be consultants that will be listed in Australia, but you can put it within a certain number of kilometers from your home. And you and I talked about that too, because you're still looking for one within the 100 kilometers, and I've given you a recommendation. But depending, because I know that Australia is a very, very big country, so perhaps people will be here from different parts of Australia. So I think that would be the best suggestion that I would have, would be to look at consultants from that might be in your area. But at the same time, I have worked with families at a distance, and I've done so with families when even a consultant might be closer to where they live. But I believe that part of that is because they felt that I was a good fit for them. Perhaps they saw me in a webinar, or I was referred to them by maybe a client of, previous client of mine, something like that. But that's something that I do recommend to families, is to make sure that whoever you are going to work with, that you take the time and to interview them, Because I believe that all RDI consultants will offer at least one free consultation. My process is actually I do a brief intake form, then we schedule the Zoom call where we answer any other questions. I get to know the family a little bit better, get to know more about the child. Then I will send them a listing of the different programs that I offer, and then we generally come back together again to meet and discuss any questions they might have as a result of that, or what program they feel might work best for them. And so it's a little bit more of a in-depth process of consideration. But we do work really well with families at a distance. So even if there's not one right in your hometown, there will be somebody that you'll be able to find if you wanted to learn more about RDI. Perhaps there'll be workshops or conferences that may be coming up in your area. And I believe that there's a website. Have you seen it, Anna? I'm trying to think of what the name is exactly, but there's a website that is specific to the Autism RDI consultants in Australia.
Oh, okay. Well, I know about the RDI Connect. Obviously, I will link all of these up on the webpage with the and I'll have a look at the Australian specific.
Yes.
I've probably been on it 10 times and don't even.
Yeah. I think if you just typed in RDI Consultants Australia, it would come up. It's just that I know that they had two at one time, and I think one is more of the recent one. I don't know if the last one is still active, but they do. The lovely thing too is that they do work together quite beautifully, and I think that they have conferences where they get together. Just even though they're all self-employed, they have conferences where they all get together quite regularly. And then as far as myself is concerned, I'm going to be launching an introductory level online parent training for RDI. And so if people are wanting to learn a little bit more about RDI, not sure if they want to jump right in and take the plunge with a consultant, this would be a really good first step. And that will be launched at the end of January, on January 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So 8 p.m. Eastern time would probably, you're in Melbourne, would probably be about 5 o'clock, noon. You're about 8. You know what? I'm going to have to look at the calendar on that. I'm just trying to go by our meeting here tonight. But yeah, I think it would work. Anyway.
Are they going to be live trainings?
It'll be live trainings. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And lots of video examples of the topics and some of the core concepts of RDI, how to frame your activities, the mindful communication, understanding growth seeking and how we want children to develop a growth seeking mindset and how that develops through the RDI program. Because if we can help our children start to want to seek out challenges and start to really want to learn, then everything else just becomes so much easier.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those live trainings, is there opportunity for questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be an hour and a half each. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm just going to be launching the information in the next, there's already some information on my website, and my website is www.mindfulguideconsulting.com. And so there's a parent training page, and I suspect that we'll link that as well to this. And so people can check out that information for that site. They can sign up for emails to receive information as it comes to learn more about the parent training. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Now, I just want to get back to something you mentioned about funding. So there are people watching from many countries, but for Australian specific, I just want to let the mums know that with NDIS funding, you need, if you're self-managed, you're very flexible in terms of what you can spend your funds on. So if you can show that your RDI program is going to be working towards your child's goals, then absolutely you can use your funding towards it. If you're agency managed, you probably need to speak with your agency about that, or speak with your planner. But it's quite well recognised around the world, RDI, and I can't really see any reason why you wouldn't be able to use NDIS funding towards this. And another way that I know parents have been using their funding is with therapy assistants, or also known as allied health assistants, where you pay, it's around $45, or if you're self-managed, you can negotiate the rate, to have students, OT students, speech students, psych students, anyone who's in allied health training, who can come and implement these games, activities, therapies, whatever your goals that you're working on with your child, so that even when you're cooking dinner, you can have someone who's getting more contact time with your child working on your program. So that's something that we've been using over the past year with our therapy assistants, and doubles up as a little bit of respite for mum, which we always like.
And if you're doing RDI, you'd be cooking with your child and then using the respite to maybe go to yoga class.
That too, yes. Now, you also, I asked you if you had some case studies or some experiences that you wanted to share with us, and you mentioned that you've got a seminar or a webinar coming up where you're showing some sort of before and after information. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, I just recently did that this fall, and it's actually already recorded, so I'll be sure to send the link to you, and then you can add this. And at the end of the interview, if people want to take a look and learn more, there is 3 different families of varying ages, and at least 3. Sorry, I'm going by memory here. There might be 4, but boys, girls, varying ages from just wee little ones to teenagers, and demonstrating before RDI, and then after the child develops more of the growth-seeking mindset, after the guiding relationship has been established, then what you'll get to see is the remarkable difference, not only in the children's states of regulation and availability for learning, and their ability to really experience their own sense of self and what they can do, because we're always co-participating with the kids, but you'll see the parents are just so much calmer and more regulated as well, because they have that meeting of the minds. So that's primarily what the whole webinar is about, is these beautiful before and afters, and some understanding about what it takes to help a child to develop a growth-seeking mindset.
Yeah, and that's great you put that together, because in the, over a long what sort of time frame is it, the before and afters, do you know?
Yes, they vary, and I speak about it in the workshop. So sometimes it's just on average, I would say about a year.
Yeah. Okay.
About a year that we really start to see the difference. Children start to relinquish their need to control or resist or avoid guided opportunities in favor of appreciating who they are and who they're becoming through the relationship with their trusted guide that they're emotionally connected to. So it's really beautiful, because this is intrinsic motivation, and children aren't requiring, some kind of a reward to engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's not how the world works.
No, it's not. I know I had come from ABA myself, and that really had an impact on my son in terms of the way that he perceived the world. Conversations were about you asking me a question, and I have to go through my Rolodex of answers, and if I can come up with the right answer, then we're okay. But it didn't allow him the freedom to communicate in a way that was authentic about his own thoughts and feelings and ideas. And so anyway, shortly thereafter, we're still transitioning into the RDI. And actually, it was a good year and a half after, but there was some residual stuff that was still lingering around from intensive ABA for 3 years. And so my son said to me one day, well, we were going to unload the dishwasher together. And he said, well, what do I get? And I said, well, you know what you get? You get to be a member of this family. That's what you get.
That's
So it
where
was
I'm at
great to
with my
normalize. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
where I'm at with my 4-year-old at the moment. It's a bit why would I want to do that? Because I want to live in this house.
Yeah, yeah. So we're just trying to really normalize everything, but we have to do it when we have kids with challenges, and not just children with autism, but RDIs, because it's based on neurotypical development, and then looking where a child hit a wall in their neurotypical development, and then trying to help build those foundations stronger. It's just so effective with so many kids.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Everything that was spoken about today, I'm going to link up on your webpage. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, obviously I'll have your contact details in there and your social media. As I mentioned earlier, I have a friend who is working with you, and she only has the most amazing things to say about what she's learned from you and how it's impacting her child, her relationship with her child, all of that beautiful stuff. So I really appreciate that you've put this time aside for us today. Is there a little message that you'd like to leave with our viewers today?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. And gosh, what kind of message? I think that the two things. One is that parents really do make the most sense to be the primary person in the child's life. So get empowered, get educated, learn how you can make the difference in your child's life, and grow that relationship. It's really, why you had children. You always wanted to have that close connected relationship so you could help your child grow, and that growth is possible, and that we just don't ever want to set any kind of limitations on who our kids can become, because it's all it's all part of a process, and growth is possible. So thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, well, thank you again for your time, and I'm wishing you all the best. And
Thank you.
I hope lots of mums watching today feel inspired to reach out and maybe look for some RDI consultants in their area. Have a little, pop your toe into this world of relationship development intervention. I feel like it's really, for our kids, it's really the most motivating. It's the best way forward really for them to learn real world skills, how to connect, using that social connection to drive their development. And that's what really underpins being a human, being social. So
yeah.
Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the interview series. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.